the archives of the Providence Historical Society lies a forgotten photograph from March 1904. It shows the wealthy Underwood family in their Federal Hill mansion, Jonathan Underwood, his wife Beatrice, and their newly hired servant. At first glance it seems ordinary, but one detail unsettles the eye. The servant's right hand resting on Mrs. Underwood's chair is marked with deep scars across the knuckles and palm. What investigators failed to realize in 1920 was that these same scars had been described in 16 separate police reports over nearly 2 decades. 16 witnesses all recalling the same woman always seen in the company of affluent wives just before those women died in what were ruled household accidents. The photograph, later uncovered in an insurance fraud file, revealed the face of one of America's most meticulous and undetected killers. The spring of 1904 marked the beginning of what Providence newspapers would one day call the reign of the Widowmaker, though the city would not understand the true horror of that name for 16 years. At the time, Providence was New England's second largest city, its wealth built on textiles, jewelry, and shipping. Federal Hill and Benefit Street boasted towering Victorian mansions with Gothic spires and wrought iron gates. Gas lamps flickered along cobblestone streets where horse-drawn carriages clattered beside the occasional motor car, while the air carried both the smoke of coal fires and the salt of Narragansett Bay. The Underwoods embodied this new aristocracy. Jonathan, 43, had made his fortune manufacturing precision instruments for the booming railroad industry. His workshop employed more than 60 men, producing the brass gauges that kept America's trains on time. Beatrice, 38, came from old New England stock. Her father, once a whaling captain, had retired to manage his textile investments. Their 3-story Federal Hill mansion, built in 1887, stood as a monument to status and prosperity. But grandeur demanded labor. Coal furnaces needed tending, gas lamps, constant attention, and polished wood and crystal required meticulous care. Like most wealthy families, the Underwoods relied on servants, though reliable domestic help had become scarce. Young Irish and Italian women who once filled such roles were choosing millwork instead, lured by higher wages and more independence. It was this shortage that led Beatrice to place an ad in the Providence Journal on March 15, 1904, wanted experienced housekeeper for prominent Federal Hill family. Must be of good character with references, generous wages for suitable candidate. The ad drew the perfect reply, though not for the reasons she expected. Elizabeth Hayes arrived on a gray March morning, carrying a worn satchel, her black dress suggesting both respectability and mourning. She appeared to be in her early 40s, her prematurely gray hair pulled tightly back, her pale blue eyes coldly observant. Her references, written on fine stationery from Boston and Hartford households, praised her discretion, her skill in managing estates, and her supposed talent for tending delicate wives with fragile nerves. During her interview, what struck Beatrice most was Elizabeth's effortless mastery of household management. She knew how to trim gas fixtures without leaks, maintain the coal stove without smoke, and polish delicate crystal without a single chip. It was as though she had done this countless times before because she had. Though Elizabeth's hands bore scars, she dismissed them as old kitchen accidents, moving with practiced confidence as she assessed the household's needs. In her soft Irish accent, she assured Beatrice, "I understand the particular strains of ladies burdened by social obligations. My former employers often suffered headaches and nervous exhaustion, and I learned remedies that bring comfort." Her gentle smile, almost maternal, put Beatrice at ease, as though this woman truly understood the quiet weight of her life. The photograph taken that March afternoon was meant to mark a successful hire. Jonathan, proud of his new Kodak camera, insisted on documenting the household staff for his business records. In the parlor, he stood beside his wife, with a hand resting on her shoulder, while Beatrice sat gracefully, with her hands folded in her lap. Elizabeth was positioned just behind her scarred right hand, placed on the back of Beatrice's chair in a gesture that appeared protective, yet strangely possessive. Neither Jonathan nor Beatrice noticed how Elizabeth's pale blue eyes lingered on the glitter of diamonds, sapphires, and gold. They could not have known that those same eyes were already measuring the worth of every jewel and quietly envisioning tragedy. As spring unfolded in Providence, renewal touched the city. But inside the Underwood mansion, another transformation was underway. Elizabeth settled into her role with the efficiency of someone who had perfected a routine. She rose before dawn to tend the furnace-prepared meals with meticulous care and kept every corner of the home immaculate. Yet her most important work came in the quiet hours after the family slept, when she moved like a shadow studying the house's hidden anatomy. Victorian mansions were intricate machines of gas pipes, air ducts, and new electrical wiring woven into old systems. Elizabeth traced them all with the dedication of an engineer learning exactly how they worked and how they could fail. Within weeks, she won the Underwoods' trust. She anticipated Beatrice's needs before they were spoken, prepared Jonathan's coffee just as he liked it, and maintained the home with a precision that silenced complaints about unreliable servants. More than that, she seemed deeply concerned for Beatrice's health, often remarking on her fatigue. "Miss Underwood works herself too hard," Elizabeth would tell Jonathan with sympathetic eyes. "These endless obligations, the strain of managing such a house, it's no wonder she suffers." Her words carried such calm reason that Jonathan began to limit the very social gatherings that had once brought his wife joy. The isolation crept in quietly. Elizabeth informed callers that Mrs. Underwood was indisposed, rescheduled engagements under the guise of medical advice, and gradually drew Beatrice into a world where her closest companion was the servant herself. By May, Beatrice confessed to suffering vivid, unsettling dreams, visions of suffocation and falling that left her waking in terror, her gown damp with sweat. She whispered that it felt as though someone had been in her room at night. Elizabeth listened with patient sympathy, suggesting the gas lamps might be to blame. "These fixtures are temperamental," she explained, while adjusting the lamp with careful fingers. "At night the pressure shifts, and the fumes can give terrible nightmares." What Beatrice could not see was how those same hands had created an almost invisible leak and that released just enough gas to cloud her mind and weaken her body without killing her outright. The first serious episode came on May 29th, 1904. Jonathan was away at a business dinner, leaving his wife in Elizabeth's company. That evening, the servant suggested dining in the smaller breakfast room for a more soothing atmosphere. The table was set with roasted chicken, fresh garden vegetables, and a bottle of wine she insisted would calm the nerves. As they ate, Elizabeth reminisced about her past positions, speaking tenderly of families in Boston. She described Mrs. Victoria Livingston, a refined woman, so like Beatrice, who had suffered beneath the same weight of expectations until her story, too, ended in tragedy. Elizabeth spoke of her former employer with wistful sorrow. She felt trapped by the endless obligations, always forced to maintain appearances. Poor dear, she never knew peace until the end. The words struck a chord with Beatrice, who found herself confessing her own struggles. The exhaustion of social duties, the pressure of supporting Jonathan's business relationships, the gnawing sense that her life was slipping quietly away. Elizabeth listened with the patience of a confessor, her scarred hand reaching across the table to rest comfortingly on Beatrice's. After dinner, she suggested an early night brushing Beatrice's hair with long, soothing strokes before helping her into bed. The gas lamp burned steady, its golden light flickering across patterned wallpaper. Elizabeth kissed Beatrice's forehead with an oddly maternal tenderness, then retired to her own quarters. What happened that night would remain shrouded in mystery for 16 years. By morning, Beatrice Underwood lay broken at the bottom of the grand staircase, her silk nightgown twisted around her body. Her grandmother's gold bracelet still on her wrist, but her diamond earrings and sapphire brooch were gone. Elizabeth's scream drew neighbors into the mansion. They found her weeping beside the corpse, cradling Beatrice's head and sobbing that she should have heard something, should have been able to save her. When Jonathan returned, summoned from his business dinner, he found Elizabeth still at his wife's side, her dress stained with tears and blood. Detective Captain William Brennan of the Providence Police arrived soon after. A seasoned investigator, he had seen countless domestic tragedies in the city's labyrinth of Victorian homes. Gas leaks, falls furnace mishaps, accidents of modern living. Beatrice's injuries appeared consistent with a fall down the steep staircase, the kind of calamity that had claimed others in the city's mansions. Elizabeth gave a calm and detailed account. She had served dinner, helped her mistress prepare for bed, retired around 10, and heard nothing unusual until she rose at dawn to prepare breakfast. When Beatrice failed to appear, she went upstairs and discovered the fatal fall. Jonathan, overwhelmed by grief, accepted it as a cruel accident. The missing jewelry was easily explained away, perhaps removed before bed, perhaps misplaced in the confusion. Captain Brennan noted the scars on Elizabeth's hand as she gestured. But when she explained they came from a kitchen accident years earlier, he dismissed the detail as trivial. In the weeks after the funeral, Elizabeth remained by Jonathan's side. She managed callers, wrote sympathetic replies, oversaw meals, and ensured the household continued to run while its master drifted in despair. Her presence steadied him, and for a time she seemed indispensable. But by late summer, the mansion felt too heavy with memories. Jonathan decided to move downtown, closer to his work, and far from the house that reminded him of Beatrice. Elizabeth accepted the decision with graceful composure. She expressed only gratitude for the chance to serve the family and concern for Jonathan's well-being. On September 15, 1904, she departed with the same worn satchel she had carried in March. Jonathan gave her generous compensation and a glowing reference letter. She told him she planned to seek work in Hartford. He wished her well, believing their paths had crossed for the last time. Jonathan could not have known that Elizabeth's departure from Providence was only an interlude. Within 2 years, she would return not to Federal Hill, where faces might remember her, but to the city's growing suburbs, where new fortunes had built new mansions. The industrial boom of the early 1900s had created families flush with wealth, yet inexperienced in the rituals of high society. Their wives, suddenly elevated from modest backgrounds into lives of constant entertaining and endless obligations, were overwhelmed and vulnerable. Elizabeth understood them perfectly. Between 1906 and 1918, Providence would see a string of household accidents that struck its wealthiest families. Always the pattern was the same: a husband away on business, a wife found dead and her home valuables curiously missing, and a recently hired servant present to raise the alarm. The police working cases months or years apart never connected the tragedies. It would take an insurance investigator in 1920 to trace the thread of coincidence back to one woman. Though for more than a decade, Elizabeth continued her quiet reign of terror, refining her invisible crimes. The photograph of the Underwoods, stored away as evidence in a forgotten file, waited silently for someone to recognize the significance of the scarred hand resting on the back of Beatrice's chair. Meanwhile, Providence itself was changing. Rubber processing, shipping, and precision manufacturing brought new wealth, new mansions, and new households for Elizabeth to infiltrate. She returned in 1906 under a new name, Catherine Lynch. With subtle adjustments to her appearance and voice, she adapted to her employer's expectations, Irish domestic to some refined English housekeeper to others. Her forged references praised her skill with nervous, delicate wives. Her second Providence victim was Margaret Tillinghast, the much younger wife of textile magnate David Tillinghast. Margaret, unprepared for the demands of her new social role, welcomed Elizabeth's arrival that October with desperate relief. The cycle repeated itself. Elizabeth isolated her mistress under the guise of concern for her health, prepared restorative remedies that sapped her strength, and spent her nights studying the hidden workings of the Gothic revival mansion. On December 12, 1906, Margaret was found dead in her bed, overcome by gas fumes from a chandelier that had conveniently malfunctioned in the night. Elizabeth played her part flawlessly, rushing to open windows and summon help, but it was too late. Captain William Brennan, now head of Providence's detectives, led the investigation. Gas accidents were tragically common, especially in winter, when sealed windows trapped fumes. The chandelier bore signs of failure that could easily be blamed on age and poor ventilation. Elizabeth gave a careful account, even mentioning that she had noticed the gas burning oddly the day before, and had meant to suggest repairs. Yet something gnawed at Brennan. Her scarred hand seemed familiar, though he could not place it. When she explained that she had once worked for the Underwood family, he recalled that case vaguely, a tragic fall down a staircase years earlier. The connection felt plausible enough. Missing jewelry was likewise explained away as items sent for repair, their absence lost in the confusion. David Tillinghast, grief-stricken and guilt-ridden for leaving his young wife so often alone, accepted every word. Through that winter, Elizabeth remained in the household, guiding David through his mourning, managing the closing of the vast mansion and ensuring her presence was remembered not as sinister, but as indispensable. When David Tillinghast sold his mansion and moved downtown, Elizabeth accepted her dismissal with the same graceful resignation she had shown Jonathan Underwood. The reference letter she carried from the Tillinghast family praised her devotion during their time of grief, ensuring her an easy path to her next position. Between 1907 and 1918, Elizabeth, working under a carousel of names and subtly altered appearances, claimed 13 more victims across Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. By then, she had honed her methods into something close to a science. Some women died in household falls, others in gas leaks or electrical mishaps, while a few wasted away from mysterious illnesses later revealed to be slow poisonings. Each death appeared tragic but plausible, and each investigation ended with the same conclusion: accident. Her success relied on conditions uniquely suited to her purpose. Living in her victims' homes gave her unrestricted access to their daily lives and to the mechanical systems she manipulated so expertly. She selected women already weakened by anxiety, depression, or chronic ailments, making sudden decline seem natural. She moved frequently, never lingering in one city long enough for investigators to compare notes. Most importantly, she understood her invisibility. Servants were essential, but overlooked. Few families or police detectives imagined the grieving maid might also be the killer. Time and again, Elizabeth presented herself as heartbroken, loyal, and helpful, offering tearful testimony about her mistress's final hours. The only detail linking her across investigations were the scars etched into her right hand. They appeared in police reports from 16 separate cases over 14 years, an odd curiosity, but never enough to arouse suspicion in an era without centralized records or cross-jurisdictional communication. Each file was closed-shelved as just another tragic accident, while Elizabeth grew bolder and more refined in her work. By 1918, she seemed unstoppable. That year, under the name Mary Sullivan, she entered the service of the Fitzgerald family in Newport. 6 weeks later, Eleanor Fitzgerald, healthy 52, with no history of falls, was found dead at the bottom of the servants' staircase, her neck broken. Elizabeth played her role to perfection, raising the alarm, weeping beside the body, and swearing she had heard a disturbance in the kitchen that drew Mrs. Fitzgerald downstairs at midnight. But this time, fate placed her in the path of someone she could not control. Eleanor Fitzgerald's nephew, Thomas Brennan Jr., a young Harvard-trained lawyer with a fascination for forensic methods, took a personal interest in his aunt's death. He had grown up hearing his father, Detective Captain William Brennan, mutter about the strange pattern of accidents that haunted Providence's wealthiest households. Now seeing his aunt added to that grim list, Thomas refused to accept the official explanation. He examined the scene himself. The stairs were in excellent repair, freshly carpeted with a solid banister. Eleanor had been strong, active, and in good health. The supposed noise in the kitchen had left no trace, no broken dishes, no evidence of intrusion, nothing at all. More troubling still, several valuable pieces of her jewelry had vanished, a diamond necklace, emerald earrings, and a gold bracelet worth thousands. Elizabeth insisted Eleanor must have hidden them for safekeeping amid reports of burglaries. But Thomas knew his aunt had voiced no such concerns. Suspicion gnawed at him. Driven by both grief and training, Thomas began combing through reports of similar accidents across New England. What he uncovered was alarming over the past 14 years. At least 16 prominent wives had died in eerily similar circumstances. And in every case, the body had been discovered by a newly hired servant, whose description varied, but who always bore scars on her right hand. The servants were always the same women in their 40s or 50s, armed with impeccable references, grieving as though their hearts had broken with their mistresses' deaths. For years, no one questioned them. The breakthrough came when Thomas Brennan spread his father's old case files across the desk in Providence's detective office. Captain William Brennan had kept meticulous records, and as his son pored over them, the invisible began to take shape. 16 investigations over 14 years mentioned domestic servants with scars carved across the right hand. "Look at this," Father Thomas urged, pointing to the pages. March 1904, Beatrice Underwood. You noted the housekeeper Elizabeth Hayes with old scars across the knuckles and palm. December 1906, Margaret Tillinghast. The servant Catherine Lynch claimed the very same injury. Here's another in 1909 and again in 1912. Every single one, the scars repeat. Captain Brennan studied the records, his disbelief slowly giving way to dread. Could one woman truly have woven herself into the lives of so many wealthy households across 4 states, killing with such impunity? The names shifted, the hair colors changed, the accents varied, but the age was always the same, and the scars never changed. His voice dropped as he remembered his most recent case. My God, Thomas. I think she was in my office only 3 months ago. The Fitzgerald death, Mary Sullivan? I shook her hand. I saw the scars. The enormity of it weighed heavily. Brennan realized he had spoken face-to-face with one of the most prolific killers in New England history and let her slip away. But proving it would be another matter. In a world without fingerprinting, without modern identification systems, they needed something irrefutable, something that tied the woman across her many names. It was Thomas who remembered the photograph. In the Underwood file from 1904, there had been mention of an image taken by Jonathan Underwood himself, a domestic record that had been collected into police evidence. If that photograph still existed, it might provide the visual proof to connect Elizabeth Hayes to Mary Sullivan. On a bitter February morning in 1920, father and son descended into the basement archives of the Providence Police Department. The space was a labyrinth of filing cabinets and dust-coated evidence boxes, 2 decades of the city's unsolved past. After hours of searching, they found the Underwood case file misfiled among accidental deaths. Closed. Inside, brittle papers detailed witness statements, but more importantly, there was the photograph faded, but still clear enough. 3 figures stood frozen in silver nitrate, Jonathan beside his seated wife Beatrice, poised in quiet dignity, and behind her, the new servant. Elizabeth Hayes, her scarred right hand resting on the back of Beatrice's chair. her pale eyes fixed not on the family, but on their jewelry. Thomas leaned close with a magnifying glass, comparing every line of her face to the woman he had known as Mary Sullivan. 16 years had passed, but the bone structure, the tilt of the head, the telltale scars, all were the same. He was certain. But certainty was not enough. To build a case that could stand in court, they would need to weave together threads from Hartford, Boston, Newport, every place where sudden household tragedies had struck. Requests for files meant weeks of correspondence, and many small departments barely kept proper records. It would be painstaking, slow, and uncertain work. Yet for the first time in 16 years, Elizabeth Hayes's carefully constructed mask had begun to crack. Despite Captain Brennan's connections, collecting evidence from multiple states was slow and grueling. While he worked through official channels, Thomas took on the urgent task of finding Elizabeth Hayes before she vanished again. He sent descriptions to domestic employment agencies across New England asking about experienced housekeepers in their 40s who bore scars on their right hand. The break came in May 1920. An agency in Hartford reported placing a woman named Helen Murphy with a wealthy family in Stamford, Connecticut, just 2 months after Eleanor Fitzgerald's death. The scars matched, as did the cold blue eyes. Brennan moved quickly. Stamford police were asked to place her under discreet surveillance, knowing that if she sensed suspicion, she would disappear, leaving another trail of bodies behind her. Detectives observed Helen Murphy carefully, noting her familiar pattern. She was already isolating her employer, Mrs. Dorothy Whitman, discouraging visits and insisting on managing her meals and medicines. Most troubling, she spent long stretches in the basement studying the home's gas and heating systems. On June 15, 1920, Stamford detectives reported that she had been caught tampering with the gas fixtures in Mrs. Whitman's bedroom during the early morning hours. The decision was made she had to be stopped before another accident occurred. Captain Brennan traveled to Stamford himself to lead the arrest. It happened on a bright summer morning. Elizabeth, disguised as Helen Murphy, walked down a quiet, tree-lined street with a market basket in her hand. Brennan approached from behind, identified himself, and presented the warrant. Her reaction was chilling. She showed no surprise, no denial. Instead, she set down the basket, extended her hands, and said calmly, "I suppose you finally figured it out. I wondered how long it would take." Her scarred right hand trembled slightly as Brennan secured the cuffs. On the train ride back to Providence, she stared out at the passing New England countryside, the very landscape that had hidden her killing spree for 16 years. When Brennan asked her why she finally turned, her pale eyes stripped of pretense. "You wouldn't understand," she said flatly. "Those women had everything beautiful homes devoted husbands security, and they wasted it whining about how difficult life was. Girls like me never had that chance." And the jewelry Brennan pressed, her lips curved into a thin, humorless smile. That was proof. Proof I had taken something they valued. The money helped, of course, but the satisfaction was in knowing I'd ended their ungrateful lives and kept their treasures as trophies. Her trial began in Providence Superior Court on October 3, 1920, and the spectacle gripped New England. The Attorney General led the prosecution, with young Thomas Brennan assisting. The case they presented was devastating. The photograph from the Underwood home, Elizabeth Hayes, with her scarred hand resting on Beatrice's chair, was the linchpin. Combined with testimony, official documents, and additional photographs unearthed in other files, the evidence formed an unbreakable chain, tying her to 16 deaths across 4 states. The defense tried to argue coincidence. Household accidents, they claimed, were tragically common in an era of faulty gas lines and dangerous staircases. But the jury was unconvinced. The scars, the aliases, the trail of grieving husbands, and missing jewelry all told a story too precise to dismiss. The mask Elizabeth Hayes had worn for 16 years had finally slipped, and the woman beneath was revealed not as a servant, but as one of America's most methodical killers. Thomas Brennan's meticulous investigation left little doubt. He had mapped Elizabeth Hayes's movements across New England, showing how she deliberately sought out households where husbands traveled, often leaving anxious wives vulnerable to her influence. The missing jewelry, the trail of suspicious deaths following each new employment, and the physical evidence of tampered gas fixtures and poisoned remedies formed a narrative the jury could not ignore. The most devastating testimony came from Dorothy Whitman, the woman Elizabeth had nearly claimed in Stamford. She described how the housekeeper had slowly cut her off from friends and family, under the guise of protecting her health. Elizabeth had prepared unusual teas and meals that left her weak and disoriented, and she convinced Dorothy that her own mind was failing. "She made me feel as though I was losing myself," Dorothy told the hushed court. "Every suggestion seemed so caring, so reasonable. But I was becoming weaker, more dependent. If the police hadn't intervened, I have no doubt I would be dead." Other former employers took the stand, women who had survived only because Elizabeth's employment ended prematurely. Their accounts were chillingly familiar: subtle isolation, whispered warnings about fragile health remedies that sapped energy rather than restored it. Together, their testimony painted a portrait of a predator who seemed to possess an uncanny instinct for recognizing and exploiting the psychological cracks in her victims. Dr. Edmund Morrison, a Boston psychiatrist, was called as an expert witness. He testified that Elizabeth's crimes were driven by more than greed. "This is an intelligent woman who built a worldview of resentment and revenge," he explained. She believed these women were ungrateful for the comfort and privilege they enjoyed. To her, killing them and keeping their jewels was not only profit, it was punishment. Throughout the proceedings, Elizabeth sat almost motionless, her pale eyes fixed coldly on the courtroom. She showed no sorrow as the deaths were recounted in detail, only the detached calm of someone hearing a familiar story. The only flicker of emotion came when the prosecution unveiled the jewelry recovered from her hiding places. One by one, the pieces were laid out before the jury: necklaces, earrings, brooches, bracelets. Each item represented a life cut short. As Elizabeth gazed upon them, a faint smile touched her lips, not of regret, but of satisfaction at seeing her trophies displayed as proof of her mastery. The trial stretched on for 6 weeks, but the outcome felt inevitable. The defense argued coincidence, pointing out that gas leaks and falls were tragically common in the era of faulty fixtures and steep staircases. They painted Elizabeth as an unlucky woman whose employers happened to die. Yet against the mountain of evidence, their words rang hollow. When Elizabeth's attorney asked if she wished to testify in her own defense, she simply shook her head, as though the performance no longer interested her. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with their verdict. As the foreman read it aloud, the packed courtroom held its breath. Elizabeth Hayes, also known as Catherine Lynch, Mary Sullivan, and Helen Murphy, was found guilty on all 16 counts of first-degree murder. Judge Harrison Blackstone, in pronouncing sentence, addressed her directly. "You violated the most sacred trust between servant and mistress," he said. "These women welcomed you into their homes, entrusted you with their safety, and treated you with kindness. You repaid that trust with calculated cruelty, taking their lives and their treasures for your own twisted satisfaction. For these crimes, this court can show no mercy. In return, you systematically destroyed their lives for your own selfish gain. The court can find no mitigating circumstances to justify clemency in your case." With those words, Judge Harrison Blackstone sentenced Elizabeth Hayes to death by electrocution at the Rhode Island State Prison. For the first time during the trial, Elizabeth displayed something resembling emotion. It was not fear nor remorse, but the faint look of someone unburdened. She inclined her head as though acknowledging a business agreement, and allowed herself to be led from the courtroom without so much as a glance at the grieving families who had gathered to see justice delivered. The appeals that followed were formalities, motions filed with little conviction. The evidence was overwhelming, and even Elizabeth herself seemed uninterested in prolonging the inevitable. She spent her final months in prison, writing what she described as a memoir of her crimes, though officials destroyed the manuscript to prevent its publication, fearing it might glamorize her deeds or inspire imitators. On March 15, 1922, exactly 18 years after she first stepped into the Underwood mansion, Elizabeth Hayes was executed. Witnesses recorded that she went to the chair unrepentant, speaking no words of regret for her victims, offering no apology to the families she had shattered. Her last statement to the prison chaplain was chilling in its simplicity. They never deserved what they had, anyway. Her case became a turning point in American criminal justice. For years, the pattern of deaths had been hidden in plain sight, dismissed as accidents. Only when Detective Captain William Brennan and his son Thomas gathered evidence across jurisdictions did the scope of her crimes emerge. The faded photograph from 1904, the Underwood family seated in their parlor. Elizabeth standing behind them with her scarred hand resting on the chair, became a fixture in textbooks, proof of how small details can unlock vast conspiracies of silence and oversight. Reform soon followed. Employment agencies introduced stricter background checks. Police departments improved record-keeping and began sharing information across city and state lines. And among the wealthy families of New England, caution replaced complacency in the hiring of household staff. For the 16 families who had lost wives, daughters, and mothers, there could be no true restoration. Yet justice had been served, and Elizabeth Hayes, the widowmaker of Providence, was finally silenced. Her scarred hands, captured forever in silver emulsion, had told their story at last. For many families, the truth brought no comfort. To learn their wives, daughters, and mothers had not died in tragic accidents, but at the hands of a calculating killer, deepened the wound. The case forced society to confront unsettling truths, the isolation of wealthy women, their dependence on servants for companionship, and the invisibility of household workers in upper-class life. These conditions had given Elizabeth Hayes the perfect cover to hunt undetected for nearly 2 decades. Perhaps most disturbing was how her crimes relied on kindness itself. Each victim welcomed her, trusted her, confided in her. Their compassion was twisted into a weapon against them. Elizabeth saw not virtue, but weakness, opportunities to exploit. This story reminds us that evil often wears the mask of innocence, hiding behind soft words and sympathetic eyes. Those scarred hands, captured in a forgotten photograph, concealed the secrets of 16 deaths. When the truth finally surfaced, it revealed one of the most chilling minds in American criminal history. What do you think? Were Elizabeth Hayes' motives truly just jealousy and greed? Or was there something far darker at work? Something even she couldn't explain? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this dive into America's hidden past, make sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another dark historical mystery. Until next time, remember, even the most ordinary photograph can hold the key to extraordinary secrets.
Thank you everyone for watching the whole video. Please like and subscribe to watch more good videos.